The beginning for me was learning about AIDS at that time when I was very young. I was back in Guadalajara, Mexico, where I was born and raised, and I learned about it, through the news, and it was sort of like in some ways something that it was distant from my world. Um, but because I was engaged in the street economy at a very young age, then I always lived with this sort of like uncertainty and fear of me being potentially infected. I started doing sex work as a minor when I was very young, and I started doing drugs when I was about 8 years old. And so all of those things obviously led for me to engage in high risk activities as means to survive as a child. When I first came to Los Angeles, I came on a way through Mexico. Me and a couple of my friends crossed the border. Santa Monica Boulevard was where all the gay and trans hookers were at. And my friends knew about it, and that's where we went to. We landed in Santa Monica Boulevard with our backpacks, and that's how we started our journey on the streets. When I came to the United States at age 16, then I started using heavier drugs. I started injecting cocaine and heroin, and obviously part of that was sharing needles. And I just don't know when I became infected. And then when I got to Los Angeles, I also, engaged in the street economy as means to survive. And that's when I also started my transition. When I refer to the street economy, it really is what we as trans women have to resort in order for us to be able to sustain ourselves and to truly survive. But I think it's also important to recognize that we have to resort to that because of the challenges that we experience within our society, right? The fact that many of us, particularly trans women of color, who are disowned by our families and who truly have to find ways and means for us to be able to survive and to continue to exist, right, in this world. When they say that we are not supposed to exist, that we are an abomination, that we are an embarrassment, and that we shouldn't be who we are, then in turn, again, we are disowned by our families and we end up on the streets. I met someone who was my first official boyfriend or lover, and I knew that he was also having sex with other people, and he would travel to other countries, and I just don't know where I could potentially have become infected. At that time, for many members of our community, the trans community, particularly for trans women, there was actually no services. I remember that when I started my transition, anything and everything that you would need, you actually would get it from other community members on the streets, whether it was hormones or, even how to, put a wig or a makeup or whatever it was. It was truly members of the community. And even, again, at that time I was homeless and I was a young person, and I was sheltered by other trans women and I was fed by other trans women. The same experiences and the same things that I experienced when I was on the streets, when I was using, were the same things that my sisters were also going through. And I felt that it was my responsibility to do something, to do anything I could. Complacency is not going to take us anywhere, right? That it is through really not just advocating but demanding that there needs to be attention to our specific needs and issues. We got our first grant in January of 2016 by the Elton John AIDS Foundation, right? That was the first foundation who trusted us, right? That we could do something good for our own people. Since then, we have built a multi-purpose, multi-service space here in Los Angeles that has now 14 people working there. All of us are trans-identified individuals. Infections in our communities are now skyrocketing, right? Black and Latinx infections, HIV infections, continue to rise. And even today in 2020, there's still many challenges when it comes to HIV prevention and HIV care, specifically for trans women and trans people in general. It took us about 20 years for CDC to finally recognize that trans women are not men who have sex with men. And it took a long fight, really, for CDC and other federal entities to recognize that the experiences and lives of trans people were different. We're still having challenges, even though they are now the federal government is using what they call the two-tier model or question, in which they ask, or health departments are supposed to ask, what was your sex at birth and what is your gender identity now. And so that's a way to capture those individuals who are of trans experience. We are a small community in comparison to the MSM community or the multiple communities who are impacted by HIV, but yet we are the community that has the highest incidence of HIV infection. And so that is the reality that we still experience today.